Hello, performing artists, creative community. I'm Marissa Moses. We are on day 30 of our 31 daily December embodiment challenge for 2022. We're about to head into the new year. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Time these last couple of years has felt like it's both slowed down and sped up in the most bizarre ways. I'm curious if you feel similarly. We have been on this incredible journey for the first 15 days of our practices together. We were working through essential art therapy exercises for anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And then we moved into a series of other books. We did several days working through some life visioning practices in a book called The Drummer and the Great Mountain. Yesterday, after a series of a couple other, I think, books that we touched into, I was just feeling so sad. And this happens to me sometimes. I've had it pointed out to me in connections with embodiments that when I have a really sort of happy or enlivened or opening, then I get really sad afterwards. And there's a sort of shedding process or a grief. In certain circles, I've had it pointed out to me in a way that was meant to sort of edge into there being something potentially wrong with me. I realized that in the context of that particular relationship, there were certain things that I didn't feel I was allowed to share. And there was kind of a sadness of feeling so alone in my experience because I didn't think it was welcome into the space between us. And when I spoke that and then asked for there to be conversation around the experience that was making me sad, that it felt like I wasn't allowed to talk about, it was very clear and very explicitly stated that if it was between connecting with me or having those hard conversations, they would choose to not connect with me. That can be really sad sometimes. And I think there are certain ways in which I'm aware, because of the lived experiences I've had, that bringing up certain talking points with certain people will, maybe while might be an ask for connection, can also be the ending of connection based on where the other person may or may not be at. And I think that this is what's been so hard for me about self-care for performers, because there is so much in the performing arts that I feel like I'm not allowed to say, or that I have to keep sort of quiet, or that we can have in our private conversations with our friends after shows, but we can't share actually and bring it back into connection with the production that we're working on. I know that I'm not alone in this because I've had so many people tell me similar things. And especially when those of us have alignments to bringing a certain kind of heart, a certain kind of story, a certain kind of witness into the mix that perhaps is used to being more in the shadows or used to being more quietly observant. And I've certainly been someone in my life where, growing up, I was more of a wallflower, and every so often I would build courage and do something really brave. And then I'd spent all my courage, and then I'd like go back and I'd need to recover or return to neutral, spend time with myself alone. And in some ways, I think there's a healthy component to that, that I do have a sense of security I can come back to in myself most of the time. Yet there has also been periods and phases in my life where I felt like I've had no base, like there's been no base of me. And I just have felt like I've been falling through, sort of like in Alice in Wonderland when she's falling into down the rabbit hole. You can feel like it's never ending sometimes. And I really am aware that, one, I know how to be at peace with the ride down if that ever happens again. And periodically for me, it does, as does come with those of us prone for more existential crises. And a lot of that comes from childhood trauma complex, PTSD. Learning to find a way through in the midst of all of that has been interesting. Also learning how to connect to the part and parts of me that attune to something, some sort of force or consciousness that has information for me that is very sometimes predictive of future events and will be in conversation with me about how things could go, the varied ways things could unfold, and give me almost like a choose your own adventure kind of quality to it. This piece has been an interesting component for me to figure out how to talk about it, how to share from it, how to invite you into your own relationship with your version of that, and whether or not to actually say yes to that particular kind of journey. And the thing with the visions that I've had over the course of the last maybe 5, almost 6 years now, I guess it's been, is that it's really important for me to not fixate on outcome. Yet, so much of my visions have been about, well, if you do these things, you'll get this outcome. If you do these things, you'll get this outcome. But don't fixate on outcome, because then you won't get the outcome you want. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so, it's like such a mind fuck. I think what I'm learning for myself is just like how to go day by day, how to go moment by moment, while still being willing to know and trust that there is a directionality to the work that I'm doing and presenting, even as sometimes it feels like there's not, that within the chaos, there is oftentimes an unfolding of truth that can be present if we are with our bodies and each other in a way that is to a place that sort of bridges magic and science. Which brings me to our book for today, Wired for Dating. And I love to talk about auditioning like dating. I think that as performing artists, if we are the kinds of performing artists that incorporate auditioning into our work, or even just meeting new people, you can call it networking, you can call it community building, but that there is a form of connection points that can sometimes mirror the relational skill sets that it takes to also learn how to be good at dating. We can also learn to use those skill sets, transfer those skills. Maybe we're not looking for a sexual connection. Maybe we're not looking for like a life partnership to build a nuclear household with, and that's not what everyone's looking for in dating either. But being able to discern, well, what are you looking for? Here's what I'm looking for. And then have those conversations and then tune into our bodies and then find out if there's a match, if there's a place of connection for continued creative and relational time together. So this book, Wired for Dating, it says how understanding neurobiology and attachment style can help you find your ideal mate. It's by Stan Tatkin, PsyD, MFT, forward by Harville Hendricks, PhD, and Helen LaKelly Hunt, PhD. And is it Getting the Love You Want? I think is another book by Harville Hendricks and his wife. And it's a beautiful book all about how to be in connection with sort of the wounded children at the center of each of us, because so many of, and I'll get into this book in a moment, but what I remember from reading that book, Getting the Love You Want, is that oftentimes we have little children at the center of ourselves, our inner child, right? If you are in some sort of therapeutic work, you've probably heard that term, the inner child. And the inner child is the part or pieces of us that are still connected to our wounds and wishes from when we were little. There's a part of us that wants to heal those old wounds and fulfill those young wishes that is still alive and present with us today. And oftentimes when we are dating, we are looking to heal some of our attachment wounds from our early childhood caregivers with our romantic partners. So our inner child is looking for a parent, not a romantic partner. And so Getting the Love You Want is about meeting that reality and allowing the romantic partner to step in as what the sort of child self would have needed in attachment attunement, and learning how to do things like mirroring, like what I heard you say was, is that what you meant? And then the inner child can clarify and help see itself. No, I didn't mean that. You said this. That's not what I mean. You misunderstand me. This is what I mean. Okay, well, I hear that I misunderstood you. This is what I heard this time. Is that what you mean? And then you go back and forth until you gain clarity, because oftentimes there's miscommunication that happens around what someone's trying to express and what someone's interpreting on the other end. And if you've been in a romantic relationship, you probably know that dance. I certainly do know that dance. I've been in a 7-year relationship and 2 4-year relationships, and varying degrees of success and challenge within those, and also progression of skill sets throughout the course of our time together. And in all of those particular ones, a realization that there was not ground to stand on, that even as we were finding these ways forward, I think that for me, what I came to was that it felt like I didn't realize maybe that that's what we were doing, was taking turns in the sort of parent child mode when we were talking and healing with each other. And I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to. I wanted someone who would work through that on their own and then come back into connection with me. And in some ways, yeah, I still do want that. And I want that in my creative career, and I want that in my personal relationships and my friendships and my family. And at the same time, I do also recognize that somehow, somewhere, some way, we all need to have some sort of mirroring. We all need to have those childhood relational wounds healed. And perhaps self-care for performers, at its most core essence, truly is about meeting those core childhood needs of ours, so we don't go out reaching desperately into our creative career, into our performance practice, into our romantic relationships, into our sexual exploration. And we can do any and all of that as feels truly right to us, but that we're not in self-betrayal or looking for something that actually isn't available in a place where we wish that it was, that we start to see and discern the thing that I really want might not be on the other side of that dream, or it might actually be over here where I would never look for it because that sounded boring. But what I'm looking for is stability, but I'm trying to get it in the most unstable environment possible. So how can I either choose a different route and find more stability in something that's more of a match, or how can I find the stable aspects of even the wish that I'm looking for, but allow there to be a stability there. And then if growth happens, beautifully, but I'm not trying to build on faulty foundation. I have some sort of solidity underneath me that feels like a healthy attachment. So we're going to do the thing we do. We're going to ask this book from that sort of animist state where everything has an essence, a soul essence, and certainly plants and rocks and the wind itself. But I also do believe that objects and the time, the tension, the intention, the attention and intention poured into them, especially with things like books, can hold so much life force energy, can hold so much informational vibration. And we can commune with it. We can ask for what we need. We can relate with it. And there's a magical element, but there's also sort of just like for me at least, like a pragmatic, practical, like tuning into the radio station you want to listen to is a common way in which people will talk about spiritual dialing in. So we're going to spiritually dial in to this book and how it might meet the core needs of you, of me, and of the space between us in this relationship that we have through self-care for performers at its core essence. Okay. It's early. We're before you date. We're in the before you date section. And I opened to myth 2. You have to love yourself before you can love someone else. I'm curious what myth 1 was. So dispelling some love relationship myths. I always like to go back though and like read like, okay, how do we get here though? So it says, before we go any further, I want to talk about some common ideas. I would call them myths about love, relationships, many ideas that I believe make it harder to find a partner, or at least to have a happy experience doing so, have taken hold to varying degrees of our collective minds. If you are interested in understanding how you are wired for dating and want to use that understanding to your best advantage, I suggest carefully reassessing each of these myths. Number 1, myth 1, love is all you need to make a relationship succeed. That's a myth. I'm not going to go into it, but that's there. Myth 2 is the one we open to. And this is that you have to love yourself before you can love someone else. If this were true, a baby would have to love itself before it was able to love its mother. But that's not what happens. A baby learns to love from being loved. For a baby, there is no loving without feeling loved, or vice versa. The two work in tandem, inseparable. In fact, the baby experiences being loved and loving before it has any concept of what love is. Moreover, self-love becomes meaningful only after a child experiences a sense of separate self. That typically occurs after a child's first birthday, according to pediatrician T. Barry Brazelton from 1992, and others who have researched and written at length on this topic. Suffice it to say that in our earliest stages of development, love is like a vast ocean whose waves do not distinguish between self and other. And that, to me, from a spiritual concept, it feels like a lot of what certain spiritual concepts attune to and tune into as a way of healing. So I want to marker that as a potentially lovely thing, right? There are also ways in which that can be distorted or manipulated or used to bypass real harm. And so we're going to be aware of that too. But here we go, continuing on from the lens of this book. The myth of self-love being primary implies that as an adult, you should stop right now, go somewhere, and learn to love yourself before you embark on the dating journey. And I'm going to say, or on the audition journey, or on the creative career journey. It supposes that you can generate self-love by taking a class, reading a book, or meditating in a cave, but you can't. You learn to love by engaging with others, period. It can't be done alone. And one thing for me with self-care for performers, I started by teaching self-care classes cross-departmentally. And in one particular department, I kept getting, you have to keep it about themselves. It can't be about relationships. It has to be about themselves. It can't be about relationships. And I was like, but and what I was seeing, the feedback I was getting from my classes, what I was seeing, what my students were saying was that the inhibitions towards self-care were that there was no sense of relational safety. And so relationship really was the need that my courses had for establishing a sense of self-care. So we can't just go into a cave and learn how to self-love without other people. We also can't just go into a cave and learn how to self-care without the context of other people. Some people turn to this myth because they feel they can cease to exist as a whole person while in relationship or even while dating. This feels so threatening that they decide the only solution is to opt out, which is where I kind of wound up at, I think last night, where I was like, I need to tap out of the performing arts. This is too much, too overwhelming. And this is how I feel sometimes while auditioning or in relationship with having like reps that are wanting to book me work. I start to feel like I'm not a whole person. I start to feel like I'm losing myself in the relationship or the relationships. Maybe it's with the company, the theater company, the dance company, the project, the direction that things feel like they're heading. Sometimes will, to me, feel like I have to leave parts of myself behind in order to be in connection with them. Do you feel the same? I'm so curious. I think it's a common thing. This feels so threatening that they decide the only solution is to opt out, at least for now, to avoid the risk until they have somehow become strong, self-loving, and ready. I believe the opposite is true. That if you were hurt in a relationship, then only a relationship can heal you. Couple therapist Harville Hendricks, 2007, puts it more explicitly. Quote, in order to heal the wounds of the past, you need to receive love from a person whom your unconscious mind has merged with your childhood caregivers. You might say you're not ready for that. Okay. In that case, perhaps therapy would be a good place to start, or just hanging out with friends for a while. Friendship is a vital form of relationship and can be very healing. Or having the experience of living alone for once, or even just sticking to the company of pets or plants, or getting involved with an interesting hobby. You may need to seek solace in situations that feel less emotionally risky, at least temporarily. But if you want to find a special someone eventually, you will have to jump into the dating world. You might not feel completely ready for a love relationship, but see if you are ready to learn to love both yourself and another. That's the end of that myth. I'm going to read you the headings of the other myths just so you know what they are. Myth 3, you have to learn to take care of yourself before you can start dating. Myth 4, you shouldn't rely on only one person for your well-being. Myth 5, I need to find my soulmate. Myth 6, dating is for the young. I'm too old. Auditioning is for the young. I'm too old. So we'll see how things continue to go. But this idea of wired for dating, wired for auditioning, shall I say that? Wired for auditioning. Shall we walk that as a performing artist? Let's do it. Okay. I am now wired for auditioning. Oh, no. I go, no, 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 don't want it. No. I said no. I said no. I said, I don't want this. I don't want that. I don't want this. I don't want that. But I also want to say, like, what if this is being wired for auditioning? No, I don't want this. I don't want that. This isn't for me. That is not for me. I'm not interested in this. That is a no. I say no to that. No, thank you. Really claiming, clarifying our agency of no, not this. This isn't right for me. This isn't good for me. This isn't what I want. I choose something different. And part of being able to be in a loving relationship is to honor each other's no's, to understand boundaries for ourselves and for those in relationship with us, to attune to the this isn't working. So if we are from a standpoint of looking to see if we can find, just got a phone call from my mom of all people. So, and we have been really healing our relational wounds. Let's let this be a part of it. We've been really healing our relational wounds, mostly with her as the child and me as the caretaker. I am caretaking for her. And a lot of the wounds in which were passed down to me that were caused because of her reactivity from her wounds, as I'm able to sort of just nurture her and give her the kind of attunement she didn't get as a baby, as a child, as someone who's had a lot of traumatic experience throughout the course of her life, even after that, as someone who's very special, who needs more safety, care, and attention, yet loves to be free and put herself in dangerous situations that she doesn't register as dangerous. It's like attuning to the fallout, attuning to her nervous system, attuning to the way in which she hasn't had a safe base where someone can just really accept her as she is, love her as her needs are, and not blame her, make her wrong for the part of her that does need TLC and connection and caring. And perhaps this is me wired for auditioning, wired for performance, wired for self-care for performing artists. It's that one. This is me wired for self-care for performers. Is the willingness to be like, hey, I know you've been through a lot. Hey, I know there's a lot out there that's really hard. And I know that you weren't raised either in your early performance family, and maybe you were, right? So those of you who are like, I was, well, okay, so you were. But if you're that defensive of it, then I'm going to question that there might be some other layers also going on. Or that just those early childhood stuff or those creative wishes that went unfulfilled, or the all that inner child stuff. When I've done inner child work with my classes, something really opens up. I found that sometimes a transition between childhood and adulthood that goes a myriad of different ways, and I've handled that in ways that have been really incredible, eye-opening, and transformative, and in other ways where was not as tender as I needed to be with certain psyches. And for anyone who maybe experienced that, I apologize to you deeply. It's hard when you're in the context of community, right? Because when I lead my community classes, there's communal storytelling and there's group attunement. And sometimes I attune to the group and try to hold space for the group, but really in certain situations, and I have done this in plenty of situations, but in some I didn't. We learn as we go. Sometimes it's important. Someone in a group environment is going through something really intense, and maybe this is on set and an actor is having a panic attack, or maybe this is in a rehearsal process and someone isn't comfortable with the course of the direction that the scene is going, or maybe this is a performing artist being sent out to the kind of auditions that they don't want to be a part of. And if the space around them can shift and hold clarity around what's coming up for you, what do you need? It seems like what might be a better fitted suit is to submit you in these ways. Does that feel more secure to you? Is that something you would like? Or, wow, this actor's having a panic attack. Let's calm the room down. Let's make things as quiet as possible. Let's help them get back into their body, back into the present moment. Not worry about where you need to go, because panic and anxiety is about future, right? Future tripping, worried about the future. So bring them back to the present, and maybe even ground them into the past of where you've been together and how you got to where you're at, and that there's no rush. And I know that time is money, but I promise you that you will save money and time if you really step into being able to communicate from your core needs and the core needs of those that you're working with. And I also recognize when you are the performer, we are so often put in a place where we have to advocate for our needs instead of having them met, instead of being relational with someone who's there to help us support our needs. And part of that is we can shift our framework, we can shift the way in which we're communicating. And part of it is also to know and discern what kind of environment, what kind of performance culture, what kind of project atmosphere is there, and is it one that normalizes abuse and expects you, anticipates that you, and requires the internalization of abuse in order to show up strong. To me, that is not resilience. People might argue that that is. For me, I want to break those cycles. I want to choose a different way. I want to come into connection with the possibility that we all care about ourselves and have the capacity to care about and for one another. And that when we do it that way, everything gets better. Here's the thing though, some people are going to be pushing something and they might not be aware of themselves. That can be a challenge for me. When I hold space and self-care for performers, we can play with that challenge in sort of like a sacred theater kind of way, where we're like, okay, here's the archetype, here's the role that's moving. This is the paradigm it's in. This is how that paradigm interrelates with other experiences. Do you see the patterns? And sometimes that person can embody that in their own sacred theater experience and walk through it. And sometimes they may want to watch it, because when we have distance, we can sometimes see ourselves a little bit more clearly and watch that play out, so that there are ways in which we can utilize that. And I feel like I just am kind of bringing these two halves together. Sort of sacred theater as a way of working things out through the experience of play, and I want to say the word prayer. As much as I'm like, I can't stand words that are similar to religious things, it's true, I can't. But I also recognize that it's important that at some point I start to integrate and unfold some of the ways in which things are used and worded, because like from a energetic standpoint, they make good sense. I can still clarify that there are conversations we need to sift and sort through to make sure that the way in which we're using them is aligned to the direction we really want to move. And if you're here with me, you're probably more of like a holistically minded or like heart-centered or like soul savvy, or like you just want people to love each other, you just want to be free, or you just want to be allowed, or you just want to like have it not be so hard and feel a little more ease, right? In your career, in your craft, in your community, in your finances, in your love, in your family. That these are all sort of patterns of recognition that we can use and utilize to help in all of those ways. And then they can also breathe into the stories that we create, so that the stories have, and they don't all have, sometimes they can just be snippets of like dreams, and they can be valuable without this for sure. But to be able to experience something that is a completion process for ourselves and for one another within a sort of community witness allows a healing process, as opposed to just like trauma porn where we're just looking at and watching the trauma and like, you know, or you feel it and you're like, oh, me too. And that can be important sometimes. So I don't want to say that we never do that again. That can be very important sometimes. And I really want to offer the possibility, the potentiality that those of us who are tired of that, who don't want that anymore, who are exhausted by it, whose bodies are just like, I can't keep doing this, that you have another way. A way that directly works with your body, your core needs, bringing together history and present to be able to resolve some of what's been heartbroken inside of us, or what's been wishing for something, or knowing that we have a journey inside of us, outside of us, expressive, something that wants to be lived. And we're curious how we can meet ourselves and one another in a way that supports the living of that. This feels like the heart of a lot of when self-care for performers feels really good for me, in a way that isn't just good for me and not good for you too, but like in a way that I'm like, no, I see how this is beneficial for like the community of creative well-being, for the relational trust that I want in myself and that I want to invite you into with yourself and your community, and between us in the way in which we talk about things. And then any of the environments where I hold space, whether that's in private mentorship, where you have your own sort of experience of sacred theater that moves through you, or guided initiation that allows you to tune into parts of yourself that maybe are in a sacred theater dance, or in a more collective or community driven relational space where we can hold that witness for stories that need, want, desire to be played out between us, with the bodies and the history and the potentiality of the individuals that come into connection point together. So if you would like to join me for one, I am doing a group connection on, I think it's January 8th. It is the second Sunday of January at 10 a.m. It's going to be on Zoom. We're going to explore what feels right to explore based on the bodies that show up. And sometimes that looks like an embodiment. Sometimes that looks like a group meditation. Sometimes that looks like reading some passages from a book, or pulling a card, or sharing a little bit about where we've been, where we're at, where we're headed. That there is a little bit of a freeformness to it. Yet what I like to always do is to take the temperature, check in, and have some form of experience. And sometimes we do one or two more, and sometimes it's just the one. And then we decompress, we integrate that experience, and we close out. But we are practicing attuning to the present moment, attuning to our bodies. And I also attune to how much it seems like there's a desire to share in the sort of collective witness versus how much there seems like there's a desire to be more private and be in personal practice alongside one another. So those are things, session to session changes. But if you join the Self-Care Garden, if you'd like to become a member over there, we will meet once a month. My intention is to create a steadiness, wired for connection sort of space for those of you who wish to be wired for auditioning or wired for the performance or wired for dating, that you can come more deeply into connection with what your nervous system needs in order to feel like you have support from others, from me, from the community, from the practices, all of which can facilitate a supportive environment and experience for you to feel like you're being met in those sort of newborn baby vibes. And then you can maybe even find parts of yourself that meet those newborn baby vibes in you. And then that can be where you start to really cultivate a deep understanding and knowing of what self-care as it relates to receiving care, giving and offering care. That care can become this sort of between you and me, self and other, this space of care. So, with that, I'll leave you for today and know that tomorrow is our last day. And I'm so excited. I'm not sure what it's going to be, if we're going to do some sort of ceremony or ritual, or if it will be a continuation of sort of what we bridged into today. But I can feel the energy being really ripe and rich, and I can't wait to see what the next completion moment before we then will enter into the next stage for self-care for performers. And some of the things I know that I want to do after these 31 days is I want to come back to my podcast. I have like 12 episodes of interviews with people that I have been like stuck with and haven't felt like I could make progress with. So I want to finish editing those, put those out, know that like I ride with the times, and like sometimes I express in ways that I look back on and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have said something different. And we all do that. And sometimes I have conversations and I go, oh, is this safe to share? And I'm going to find that out in the process. And I'm going to be clear in my personal intentions and integrity along the way, and know that I can keep coming back to and refining ways in which I can be more attuned to the caring component, the loving component, the compassion component for myself and for others. So deep breath in, exhale, and just drop into your body a little bit more. 2 more, deep breath in through the nose. And exhale, creating space in the heart and the pelvis. Last one, deep breath, arms up. Stretch, stretch, stretch at the top. Squeeze, 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 and let it go. All right. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.